Good morning, everyone, and good Shabbos. When we were traveling in Maine with the family, we went to a national park called Acadia National Park. It's one of the most beautiful national parks in America. And as we were going through the beautiful hiking trails there with the family, I told my family the following story. That there was once this child who used to go off into the woods every day, into the forest. And his father one day asked him, "Where do you go?" He says, "I go into the forest." He says, "Why do you leave into the forest every day?" He says, "I go to talk to God." So his father said to him, "Sonny boy, the same God that's in the forest is in the city. Why do you have to go into the forest?" And the boy said to his father, "God may be the same everywhere, but I'm not the same." When we're in a beautiful natural environment, we see God's beauty in nature, we feel different and we connect with God differently. We're very fortunate to live in the Sunshine State. Florida, you see nature, you feel nature around you all the time. Trust me, I come from Brooklyn. You don't see it all the time the way you see it here. In this week's parsha, there's a commandment that says that when you go to war, do not chop down any fruit-bearing trees. Why? Famous verse, Ki Adam Eitz Hasada, man is like a tree in the field. And therefore you should respect nature. And don't just chop down the trees. Protect the environment, so to speak. Preserve nature. And I want you to know that the rabbis take this commandment and broaden it. And I think it's very relevant and applicable for our generation. You know, one of the issues in our society is that there are the haves and the have-nots. But those who have such an abundance that there's such a wastefulness. There's so much extravagance. You know, you go to parties and you see the amount of food that goes into the garbage, and you think about all the people who are starving, right? The Torah says that, the verse says, Lo tashchit, you should not destroy the trees that bear fruit. God created those fruit-bearing trees. So the rabbis say it doesn't just mean, because you and I, what does it mean? I'm not going to war, I'm not going to chop down trees. Am I ever going to fulfill this commandment? The rabbis say, you know what the practical application is? Don't be wasteful. Don't waste anything God created. Just like you shouldn't chop down a fruit-bearing tree, don't throw away food. Don't throw away anything that has value to it. When we were kids in many religious Jewish homes, when the mother wants the kid to finish their plate, you know, every mother's saying, finish your plate, finish your plate. So how do you convince your kids? Well, the most convincing argument in my home was, you have to finish your plate because it's bal tashchis. If you don't finish your plate and you put it in the garbage, it's wasting. It's a biblical prohibition. You're not allowed to waste. You have to finish your plate. But the idea that nothing should go to waste in God's world is the commandment of bal tashchis, don't destroy. However, there's a broader commandment here. And the commandment as well is respect nature. You know, protect the environment. As a matter of fact, Rabbi Samson Fall Hirsch, going back to the story in Genesis and Bereshis, where we find Adam and Eve told not to eat from the tree of knowledge, he interprets that story to mean don't harm and don't take anything you choose to. You have to respect the limitations in nature. You know, God gave us the day of Shabbos so we human beings could rest. He also told us our animals should rest. But even more than that, He gave us the sabbatical year, the Jubilee year, where the land has to rest. You have to, as God told Adam and Eve, la'avda l'shamra, you should preserve, guard the land, and la'avda could also mean not just to work it, but to serve the land, to serve the earth. And here, Rabbi Samson Folosh is a very novel interpretation. We know that when God created man, He said, "Let us make man." So the big question that everyone asks is, what do you mean, let us? There's only God, one God. Who is He talking to? So Rashi says He was talking to the angels, consulting with them, teaching us to consult with those who are your underlings before you make a decision. God could have made a decision on His own to make man. He consulted with the angels. Rabbi Samson Paul Hirsch says something very novel and insightful. He says, you know who God was talking to when He said, let us make man? He was talking to nature. He was saying to nature, do you agree that we should make man? Why? Because man may come along and destroy nature. So nature had to give its blessing to the creation of man with the hope and the prayer and the understanding that man will not destroy the nature, but preserve it because God created that nature for a purpose. And that is one of the messages of this week's parsha, that yes, as Jews we are environmentalists and we have to protect the environment and we have to preserve it for many, many reasons, but ultimately because God created it and He set bounds and limitations. And today always the question, development versus preservation, right? And man wants to conquer, man wants to create, man wants to build. But at the same time, you have to know you're also not just a creator, but you're a created being. And you have to impose limitations upon yourself. It reminds me, just in conclusion, there's a beautiful medrash that says when God made iron, the trees complained to God. And the tree said, God, you're making iron, the iron's going to come and chop us down. So God said to the trees, if you don't provide the wood for the handle of the axe, then the axe can't chop you down. Very profound medrash. What the medrash is saying on a psychological level is that unless you empower someone, they cannot hurt you. Just like if the wood doesn't provide the handle for the axe can't chop you down. And in conclusion, I'm reminded of a story, a rabbi, they tell a story. He was going to shul on Kol Nidre night and he sees an envelope at his door. He opens it up and there's a piece of paper and it has one word across it and it says, idiot. He goes to shul, he gets up to make his Kol Nidre sermon and he says, as a rabbi I've gotten many letters where people wrote letters to me, they didn't sign their name. But this is the first time someone signed their name without writing a letter, attaching it to it. And the moral of the story is, no one can hurt you unless you give them the permission to hurt you. But one fundamental commandment in this week's parsha is that nature relies on us to respect it and protect it.